So you want me to start out why?
Yeah, start out with the 2.
Yep, we are rolling.
I'm here with Michael Ware, CNN correspondent. Michael's been in Baghdad for the last 6 years. Michael, thank you for being with us this morning.
Great pleasure, thanks.
The big news today and over this weekend was that the Iraqi cabinet has approved the Status of Forces agreement. Could you talk a little bit about some of the issues that were holding back that agreement and why you think it's preparing to pass, why it's gone to the parliament now?
Well, some of the sticking points obviously have been the Iraqis were insisting upon jurisdiction over US soldiers who committed crimes, and that's a red line for the US administration. That was finalised with an agreement that the Iraqis would be able to lay claim to judicial matters affecting US soldiers if the incidents in question occur outside of a US base and if the troops are off duty. Essentially, that would probably never happen. But the main sticking point, certainly for the Iraqis, has been an actual deadline for withdrawal with no conditions. And that's what we see that in the final draft that was forwarded by Washington and which has now been approved by the Iraqi cabinet is a fixed, firm, non-negotiable date, being December 31, 2011, for the withdrawal of all US forces, regardless of what's happening on the ground, what state the country is in, and the wishes of the administration in Washington.
There have been reports that Iran was lobbying hard against the completion of this agreement. General Odierno, who's the Supreme American commander in Iraq, had accused Iran of bribing lawmakers and using other forms of pressure. And some conservatives and others are now saying that the completion of that this agreement is now nearing completion should be looked at as a defeat for Iran. How do you interpret that?
I, in fact, would argue that it could potentially be a victory for Iran. In some ways, you can argue that these have been a form of indirect peace talks with Iran to end certainly that particular part of the conflict. Because as we know, for the past 12 months or so, more American troops have been dying at the hands of Iranian-backed militias than at the hands of al-Qaeda or the insurgency combined. All of the factions that run the Iraqi government are parties that were either formed in Tehran, have ongoing military and financial and political links with Tehran, or like the president of Iraq's own political party, have had long-standing relationships of necessity with Iran. So Iran has a lock, so to speak, on influence and persuasion to a large degree within the Iraqi political process. Indeed, the Iranian ambassador in Baghdad himself is the man who pulled the Shia political coalition together that was able to form the government. So Iran has a whip hand, or a key hand at least, within the political framework there. So during these negotiations between Baghdad and Washington, Tehran, whether we like it or not, was in the room. Tehran, in some ways, in some fashion, is a party to this agreement. And you'll see that some of the sticking points and some of the nuances within the negotiations were issues that were very close to the heart of Tehran. So, indeed, in some ways it could be considered that Iran has found itself in a position where, of course, it didn't get everything it wanted, but then neither did Washington, and indeed neither did Baghdad, but Iran still will feel that it has something of a comfort zone as a result of this in the form in which it should hopefully pass the Iraqi parliament.
In what has become kind of a ritual of Iraqi politics, we saw a delegation from Maliki's government travel down to Najaf and meet with Ayatollah Sistani to show him the new draft agreement, and when he signed off on it, this kind of gave the green light. I think this was his office's own term to move forward with it. What does this say about the future of Iraqi politics, the great influence wielded by Sistani as well as other Ayatollahs in the region, Fadlallah and Hairi?
Well, that's going to be an interesting thing to see as it plays out in the next general election, which is due sometime next year. The role of Sistani in the last general election was pivotal. Politically, nothing would move without his imprimatur. However, we've seen some erosion of that. Certainly within the Shia majority, Sistani carries the weightiest moral and to some degree political voice. However, what we've also seen is some of the Iraqi political parties, now that they're in government and they've been able to use the instruments of government, shoring up their power and influence in their own right. So what we will see is that while Ayatollah Sistani shall remain an important figure within the political milieu, it will be a test of his ongoing influence and weight as to see how effective he can be in controlling the political movement or the political current that starts to form coming up to next year's election.
And which parties are you referring to there?
Particularly ISKI. I mean, they still form the backbone in many ways of the administration in Baghdad. They're certainly the largest, most well-funded, arguably the best organised political party. And this is a political party that in its original form was created back in Tehran during exile from Saddam's regime.
And the Hakim, I believe, gave his assent to the agreement from Tehran, where he was to
absolutely. And we also see that, Muqtada al-Sadr is still in Iran. Now, the question as to why he's there is one that has not yet been answered. To some degree, he's taking sanctuary from US forces, even though US forces no longer seek to arrest or detain him. To another degree, he's taking sanctuary from internal Iraqi political enemies. But there's also a degree to which he may, in effect, be hostage, so to speak, to the Iranians. Because Sadr and his quite powerful political movement has posed some threat to Iranian interests. Certainly they're the direct opponent of ISKI and Hakim. They certainly were the greatest rivals. And Muqtada was someone who posed a very difficult relationship for Tehran, because the basis of Muqtada's popularity was his Iraqi nationalism. That he and his family, unlike so many others within the new Shia leadership, did not flee. We stayed, he says, while the others left. Now, Tehran needed a relationship with him, and a close one, yet he's not bound to them, and they found him difficult to deal with because he had his own agenda and was, to some degree, able to fulfill some of that agenda on his own behalf. Eventually, with the erosion of the Jaish al-Mahdi during a number of conflicts, with the increasing power of ISKI and the instruments it uses within the government, he found himself in a more precarious situation, which Tehran took advantage of. It enhanced its relationship with him, and he became almost reliant upon them. By keeping him in Iran, they're very much able to keep him on a short leash.
Just a couple more questions. In regard to the Jaish al-Mahdi, would you say that their moment is really over, or they've just put their guns in the closet, and could they be called up or reactivated in a significant way?
They could be back on the streets within the blink of an eye. Should there be a call for it from Muqtada himself, or should they on the street level feel the need for it if there is a provocation? The Mahdi army always was a truly insurgent or militia organisation. It's made up of irregulars, guys who, even like the Sunni insurgency, but more so, will take a couple of pot shots at a US or government convoy one minute and they're back selling bread on the corner the next. They might fight only once in a month, but they're there. They're the fabric of the community. However, the military aspect of the Sadrist movement has now been overtaken, certainly on its cutting edge, by what the American military calls the special groups. The special groups began as a string of commanders of the Mahdi army who became disenchanted with Muqtada and his political accommodations with the government and particularly with the Americans to some degree. Hardline elements who didn't want to give up the fight, or those who found themselves more closely aligning with Iran. So these commanders and the men who followed them, at first in a drip feed and then in a great wash, have gone to Iran or have received training inside Iraq that has made them a far more effective fighting force. So while they do not have anything like the numbers of the Mini Army, the sophistication of their attacks and their capabilities far supersedes that of the Mini Army. Now, whilst these two groups, the Medi Army and the special groups, were indeed themselves rivals, what we saw with the siege of Sada City, first the attack on Basra back in March, and then the siege of Sada City that occurred in the weeks and months that followed, the realities of battle brought these two groups back together, and for that time their differences were put aside. And certainly in the aftermath of the siege of Sada City, we saw a fusion that we had not seen before between the Medi Army and the special groups. Whether that linkage will remain, and if it does, to what degree, is yet to be answered. But the short answer is that the Medi Army is there to rise up again if or should the need arise in the minds of its members.
Okay, one last question. The Kurds have... where are they in regard to the SOFA right now, and what do you see down the road? Well, we'll say in a year from now. With we know that Kirkuk is a major issue.
Absolutely.
There are issues in Mosul over the last few weeks. We've seen some reporting. So where are they in regards to the SOFA?
Well, they've supported SOFA almost from the beginning, and they were the largest bloc that have been pushing for the agreement in some of the earliest terms with which Washington framed the drafts of the agreement. So they've been on board with the American program from the beginning, believing, of course, that by and large it was within Kurdish interests. So they've been ready to sign on the dotted line, so to speak, almost from the very beginning. Now, what we do know is that whilst the president of Iraq, Jalal Talabani, a Kurdish leader of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, is obviously the chief executive of the government in Baghdad, he and his kin are nonetheless at odds with the Iraqi government over some of the issues you've mentioned, primarily land and oil, and the reclaiming of what was believed to have been Kurdish villages and cities that have been purged by Saddam. Yet we also see that the Kurds have been pressing that advantage as well. The so-called Green Line, where the Kurdish Regional Government's administration begins and ends, has been ever creeping south. And the US military, whilst it has taken some steps to curb this, has been unable to prevent it or roll it back, particularly in areas like Diyala province and particularly in areas like Nineveh out in western Iraq near the Syrian border. Those issues were supposed to have been resolved under the Iraqi constitution earlier this year, that they have not been, and there has been a delay. That is a fuse that's been lit and is currently burning, and it's one of several that could ignite a powder keg inside Iraq. So we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out, and what role, if any, the Americans can also play in bringing the parties to an agreement on that.
Thank you very much.
My great pleasure.
Two quick questions, guys, if you have the time. One is reaction over there to the election results. Obviously, how do communications work? How widely is this known? What's the perception? What happened? That, and then I guess my other question would be, your sort of mandate from CNN is going to change. You're not going to be there full time. Can you talk a little bit about that and why? I mean, it seems to signal to me that there's clearly a perception within the news organization.
No, that was just me putting my hand up saying
okay.
6 fucking
Enough
years.
stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Then if you would, just the Obama thing.
Okay.
Okay, what was the reaction in Iraq, in the government and on the street, as you could gauge it, to the election of Barack Obama?
In a word, essentially dismay to some degree. as you asked the man and woman in the street, or indeed the members of the Iraqi parliament, you know, their leaning was towards a victory for the president, the now president-elect. However, it was the Iraqis' firm view that the American election was fixed, and that no matter what happened, Senator McCain would emerge as the victor, and by and large we would see a continuation of current US policy. The Iraqis, after so many years under a dictatorship, and given all the incredibly complex internecine rivalries and political machinations that they have in their own country, couldn't help but believe the election here in America would be engineered for a continuance of the status quo. So their first reaction literally was dismay, but by and large it's been received well, because they see Obama as an end to the US presence in their country and an end to that American-led war, or that phase of the Iraq War.
So you say dismay. Was it dismay that they had misjudged American politics?
They never thought Obama had a chance.
Oh.
They wanted Obama, most of them, but just thought it won't happen. And lo and behold, so it did.
Oh, great. Excellent.
One other question, Iraqi refugees.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about that, the number of refugees who've applied to emigrate? Sweden has actually taken more over the last several months than the United States. It's
What
going
was
to be a
that?
problem. It's something that the Obama administration
What was
pledges
that
that they'll deal with.
Yeah. What was it? Moral obligation?
No, it's a personal thing. It's not
Yeah.
he's given it the office.
Okay, so on the question of Iraqi refugees, there's been, I think, some estimates, 4.5 million people displaced both within and without the country. What's going to happen, do you think, with that problem? Has there been any significant number of people who have returned?
Some are returning, but it's still a trickle. And we also see, particularly, say, for example, the Christian community, many of whom had to flee some years ago. Those who are resolute enough to stay have found the situation, despite the successes on the security front, even more precarious now, and are leaving again. Or themselves leaving, I should say. Right now, I don't think there's any real sign of a great tidal wave of refugee returns. And I would imagine that so many of those families, be they sitting in Syria or Jordan, would see very little sign of encouragement yet, or certainly signs that they can yet truly believe in, to tell them that the situation is safe enough and prosperous enough for them to return. Certainly these people have no recourse in terms of coming to the United States. America's been very, very slow and reluctant to take on any responsibility in a significant way for these refugees, unlike, say, after the fall of Saigon at the end of the Vietnam War in 1975. Within just a couple of years, there was over 1 million Vietnamese refugees who'd been accepted into the United States and given sanctuary. Quite the contrary is true with the Iraqis. Indeed, when I was looking at this issue just earlier this year, I was told by the Secretary of State that in terms of the security clearances that Iraqi refugee applicants must go through, all Iraqis were effectively deemed to be terrorists or undesirable until proven otherwise. So that set the bar very, very high. And I think it was an indication of the administration's great reluctance to allow Iraqis to come to the United States to seek refuge.
Okay, great.
Cool.
All right, hey, I really appreciate it.
No
It's a
problem,
bit
man.
longer than